The words hit the screen before I even realized what was happening. 10 feet wide, bright enough to light the entire ballroom. Infertile, divorced, failure. Each one stamped across my face like a verdict I never agreed to. 200 guests sat beneath crystal chandeliers, forks paused midair, wine glasses hovering, and then, laughter. Not loud at first, just enough to spread. My father smiled from the head table like this was all part of the evening's entertainment. "Just a joke, sweetheart," he said, like humiliation could be softened with a single word. My mother didn't even look at me, just swirled her wine, watching the room the way people watch a good show. And my sister, standing there in her white dress, leaned into the microphone and said, "Don't laugh too hard. She might actually cry." I didn't. I sat there, back straight, hands steady in my lap, feeling every eye in that room measure me against those words. For a moment, I let them have it. The laughter, the silence, the version of me they'd been telling for years. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and typed one word. Begin. That one word didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't anger. It wasn't impulse. It was 16 years in the making. I was 18 the first time. I understood exactly what my place in that family was worth. We were sitting at the kitchen table in our house in Millbrook, Virginia. Same table we used every Sunday after church. Same polished wood. Same quiet rules. My father slid a document across to me like it was nothing, just another piece of business. "Sign it," he said. It was a land transfer form. 2 acres on the edge of town. Rolling grass, a narrow creek running through the back, and one old oak tree that had probably been there longer than any of us. My grandmother had given it to me when I turned 16. Not promised. Not hinted at. Given. Signed. Recorded. Mine. "I need it for Silver Creek development," my father said. "It's family property." "It's my property," I said. That was the first mistake I ever made in that house, saying something true out loud. My mother sat at the end of the table flipping through a home magazine like we were discussing paint colors. She didn't look up. Not once. The sound of those glossy pages turning filled the space where something like support should have been. "Don't make this difficult," my father said, his voice calm in that way that meant it wasn't. I didn't sign. 3 days later, my college tuition fund disappeared. Just like that. An account that had been there my entire life, gone. Redirected. No discussion. No warning. I found out from a letter from the registrar's office saying my balance hadn't been paid. A week after that, my father stood in the foyer, arms crossed, blocking the front door like a wall. "You walk out," he said. "You don't come back." There wasn't yelling. That would have been easier. There was just certainty. My little sister stood halfway up the stairs, watching. 11 years old, silent, learning. I walked out with a duffel bag and $43 in my checking account. That night, my father told everyone in town I'd dropped out, run off with some guy, made a mess of my life. In Millbrook, his version of the story didn't just travel, it settled in. It became fact. I slept in my car for 2 weeks in a grocery store parking lot outside Charlottesville. Early fall. Nights dropping into the 40s. I'd wrap myself in a sweatshirt and a blanket that didn't do much, and wait for morning. During the day, I worked the counter at a gas station. 12-hour shifts, coffee refills, lottery tickets, people who didn't look at you long enough to remember your face. At night, I'd sit under a flickering overhead light and study for my GED. I passed it at 19. From there, it was community college. Then a transfer to Virginia Commonwealth University on a need-based scholarship. I chose architecture because it made sense to me. You put something together piece by piece, and when you were done, it stood. No one could take it from you with a signature or a story. I graduated at 23. No one came. I remember standing there in my cap and gown, holding my diploma, looking out at rows of families taking pictures, hugging, crying. I waited a few minutes after the ceremony like maybe someone had just gotten stuck in traffic. No one did. I went back to my apartment, still in my gown, and ate takeout sitting on the floor because I didn't own a table yet. At 24, I made another mistake. I married a man who felt familiar in all the wrong ways. Jason Miller was older, confident, connected to people my father used to do business with. At first, it felt like stability, like maybe I'd found a way back into something that looked like a life. But control doesn't always come in loud forms. Sometimes it's quiet. It's someone asking to help with your finances and then slowly taking over your accounts. It's screening your calls for your peace of mind. It's deciding which friends are good for you. It took me 3 years to leave. 3 years to recognize the pattern. 3 years to understand that just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's safe. I got out at 27 with less than I'd started with, but at least it was mine again. At 28, I sat in a doctor's office under fluorescent lights that made everything look a little too sharp, a little too real. The doctor spoke carefully, like she was placing each word where it wouldn't hurt as much. It didn't matter. The result was the same. I couldn't have children. There's a kind of silence that follows news like that. Not the loud kind. Not the kind people notice. It's internal. It's the moment where something you assumed about your future just disappears. I sat there alone, holding a piece of paper with medical terms on it, and realized there was no one to call, no one to tell, no one who would hear that and see me, instead of using it. So I folded it up, put it in my bag, and went back to work the next day. By 30, things started to change. I'd built a career. Not overnight, not easily, but steadily. Project by project, drawing by drawing. I became someone people trusted with real work, historic restorations, public buildings, places that mattered. By 34, I was a senior architect at a firm in Richmond. I owned my home. I ran 3 miles most mornings before work. I had colleagues who respected me. A routine that was mine, and a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval. And still, in Millbrook, I was the girl who dropped out. The failure. The cautionary story told at dinner tables and country club lunches. 16 years of that. 16 years of being erased, rewritten, reduced. So when I sat in that ballroom, watching those words flash across a 10-foot screen while 200 people laughed, it didn't feel new. It felt familiar. The only difference was, this time, I wasn't 18 anymore. And this time, I wasn't walking out with $43 and nowhere to go. This time, I had something they never expected. The truth. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It wasn't a speech or a single moment of clarity. It was built slow, uneven, sometimes barely holding together, just like everything else in my life after I walked out of that house. Back then, survival came first. There's a difference between starting over and starting from nothing. I didn't have a safety net. No one wiring money. No one saying, "Come stay until you figure things out." It was just me, a used car that rattled over 55 miles per hour, and a duffel bag that held everything I owned. Those first months, I learned how little a person actually needs and how much it costs anyway. Gas, food, rent for a studio apartment that barely fit a twin mattress and a folding chair. I worked wherever someone would put me on a schedule. Diners, retail, late shifts that stretched past midnight. My feet would ache so bad by the end of a double shift that I'd sit in my car for 10 minutes before driving, just waiting for the pain to settle into something manageable. But even then, there was a line I refused to cross. I wasn't going back. Not for money, not for comfort, not for an apology that would have come with conditions. So I kept moving forward. Community college was the first real foothold. I signed up for classes I could afford, stacked them around my work schedule, and studied wherever I could: break rooms, laundromats, the front seat of my car. I didn't have the luxury of asking, "Do I feel like doing this today?" It was simpler than that. Either I did it, or I stayed exactly where I was. I chose to do it. Architecture came into my life almost by accident. A required class. Intro to design. The first time I held a set of drafting tools and realized I could take an idea, something that existed only in my head, and give it structure, weight, permanence. It changed something in me. Buildings don't lie. They either stand or they don't. They either hold or they fail. There's no pretending, no rewriting the story after the fact. I understood that. By the time I transferred to Virginia Commonwealth University, I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was building something. Slowly, carefully, like laying bricks, one at a time, knowing that if you rushed it, the whole thing could collapse. I still worked. Still counted every dollar. I remember calculating groceries down to the cent, choosing between fresh produce and something that would last longer on the shelf. I remember nights when dinner was cereal because it was quick and cheap and I didn't have the energy for anything else. But I also remember the first time a professor pulled me aside and said, "You see things differently. Don't lose that." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Not in my family. Not in that town. At 23, I graduated. Same story as before. No family in the crowd. No one calling my name from the stands. Just the sound of applause that belonged to everyone else. But this time, I didn't wait afterward. I didn't stand there hoping someone would show up. I took my diploma, walked out, and kept going. Because by then, I understood something I hadn't at 18. Waiting for people to become who they've never been is its own kind of trap. Work came next. Entry level at first. Long hours. Low pay. The kind of jobs where you're expected to prove yourself twice as much for half the recognition. I took everything they gave me, late revisions, tight deadlines, projects no one else wanted, and I treated them like they mattered. Because they did. Every drawing, every plan set, every detail. It adds up. By my late 20s, I wasn't just keeping up, I was leading smaller projects. By 30, I had a reputation inside the firm. Not loud, not flashy, but solid, reliable. The kind of person they handed work to when it couldn't afford to go wrong. I bought my first home a year later. Nothing extravagant. A modest place just outside Richmond. Hardwood floors that needed refinishing. A kitchen that hadn't been updated since the early 90s. But it was mine. Every payment, every repair, every decision. Mine. There's a kind of quiet pride in that one you don't post about or celebrate out loud. It's not about proving something to other people. It's about standing in your own space and knowing no one can take it from you. Not with a signature. Not with a lie. Of course, not everything I built held the way I expected. My marriage didn't. Looking back, I can see it clearly now. The way Jason Miller stepped into my life right when I was still figuring out who I was. The way control disguised itself as support. The way I mistook familiarity for safety. It didn't break all at once. It wore down slowly. A comment here. A decision made for me there. Less access to my own accounts. Fewer calls with friends. Smaller space to exist as myself. Until one day, I looked around and realized I had rebuilt a version of the same house I'd walked out of at 18. Just quieter. Leaving the second time was harder in some ways. Not because I had less, but because I had more to lose. But I left anyway. And when I did, I made a promise to myself I haven't broken since. No one gets to control my life in exchange for staying. At 28, when the doctor told me I couldn't have children, I thought that might be the thing that finally broke me. It didn't. It changed me. It forced me to sit with a future I hadn't planned for. But it didn't define me, not the way my family would later try to. Because by then, I had already learned the difference between what happens to you and who you are. By 34, my life didn't look anything like the one they described back in Millbrook. I wasn't the dropout. I wasn't broke. I wasn't lost. I was a senior architect. I managed projects that mattered. I walked job sites in steel-toe boots, reviewed plans under bright work lights, and made decisions that turned empty structures into something people could use, live in, rely on. I had colleagues who trusted me, a routine that grounded me, a life that didn't need an audience to be real. And yet, in that ballroom, none of that existed. Not to them. To them, I was still the version they created 16 years ago, the one they could control, define, and display. That's the thing about lies told long enough. People start to believe them, even when the truth is standing right in front of them. But this time, I wasn't standing quietly at the edge of someone else's story. This time, I had built my own. I had built my own life. Solid. Quiet. Untouchable in all the ways that mattered. And then my phone rang. It was a Thursday night, a little after 11 p.m. I was at my desk in Richmond, reviewing elevation drawings for a courthouse renovation. The kind of work that requires focus, the kind that keeps your mind steady. My coffee had gone cold. My back ached in that familiar, manageable way. It was an ordinary night, until it wasn't. Unknown number. Virginia area code, but not Richmond. Smaller. Familiar, I answered. My name is Linda Ramirez, the woman said. Calm. Professional. I'm a nurse at Shenandoah Hills Care Center. Your grandmother asked me to call you. Everything in me went still. Grandma Margaret was the only person in that family who had never treated me like I needed to earn my place. She didn't rewrite me. She didn't negotiate love like it was a contract. She's scheduled for hip surgery in 3 weeks, the nurse continued. She's stable, but at her age, there are risks. She's been asking for you. I closed my eyes for a second. 2 years since I'd seen her. The last time, I had to plan it like something illegal, slipping in on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew my father wouldn't be there, sitting with her for 40 minutes, talking about her garden like nothing else in the world was wrong. Then someone mentioned my visit. And just like that, I was off the list. "You're not approved," the front desk had said the next time I tried. Now the nurse's voice softened. "There's something else. Your father told her you could visit, but only if you attend your sister's wedding first. It's in 3 weeks. Of course, nothing with him came without conditions. Not access, not kindness, not even something as simple as seeing your own grandmother. I didn't say anything right away, because I already understood what that meant. It wasn't an invitation, it was leverage. And she wanted me to tell you one more thing," the nurse added, hesitating just slightly. "She said they're planning something at the reception, something about you. She wanted you to be ready." I let that sit in the air between us. Something about you. I didn't need details. I knew the tone. I knew the pattern. I knew exactly how my family operated when they had an audience. After we hung up, I stayed at my desk, staring at the wall across from me. There's a framed certificate there, Virginia Emerging Architect of the Year. It's not something I think about often. It's just part of the room. But in that moment, it felt like proof of something I didn't need to prove anymore. 5 years of silence. And the first voice from that town wasn't my mother, wasn't my sister, wasn't even my father. It was a nurse, telling me I could see the only person who ever loved me without conditions. If I agreed to walk back into the same place that taught me what conditions feel like, I had 2 options. Stay in Richmond, stay in the life I built, stay safe. Or go back to Millbrook, sit in a room full of people who thought they already knew my story, and accept whatever they had planned. Most people would call that a choice. It didn't feel like one. Because when someone you love is 84 years old, and there's a surgery coming, and time isn't something you can negotiate, you don't weigh comfort. You weigh regret. So I picked up my phone, and I started making plans. I didn't rush into anything. That's the difference between reacting and deciding. At 18, I reacted. I walked out with a duffel bag and whatever strength I could carry in my chest. This time, I sat still. I let the weight of it settle. 3 weeks. That's what I had. 3 weeks until a wedding I wasn't really invited to. A room I already knew would be stacked against me, and a grandmother waiting on the other side of it like a promise I couldn't ignore. So I did what I've learned to do best. I made a plan. The next morning, I knocked on Daniel Brooks's glass office door. He looked up from his screen, pulled off his headphones, and gave me that steady look he always had, the kind that doesn't rush you, doesn't fill silence just to make it comfortable. "I need a favor," I said. He didn't ask what kind. He just leaned back and said, "All right." I told him everything. The call, the condition, the warning about the reception, the history I usually kept folded away where it couldn't interfere with my work. When I finished, he didn't react the way most people do. No dramatic pause. No, I can't believe they'd do that. Just a small nod. "If you go," he said, "you go with a plan, not hope." That landed, because hope had never worked for me in that family. "I'm going," I said. "She's 84, Daniel. I might not get another chance." "I know," he said. "Then we make sure you're not walking in blind." That afternoon, I booked a hotel in Millbrook. Not my parents' house. Not a guest room where every movement would be watched and evaluated. My own space. My own door I could close. Then I pulled a dress from my closet. Navy blue. Clean lines. Tailored. The kind of dress you wear when you know exactly who you are, even if no one else in the room does. I packed it carefully. Not as armor. As a reminder. A few days later, I drove back to Millbrook for what my father called a pre-wedding dinner. His terms, not mine. One last rehearsal of control before the main event. The house hadn't changed. White columns. Perfect lawn. Everything in its place. Like nothing messy or human had ever happened inside those walls. No one hugged me at the door. My mother looked me over like she was assessing a piece of furniture. "You look thin," she said. I wasn't, but I knew better than to respond. At the table, my father asked what I was doing with myself these days. "Architecture," I said. He nodded like I'd just told him I was answering phones. "Reception work, I assume." I let it pass. Correcting him wouldn't have changed anything. Not here. Not with him. Later, My sister pulled me aside in the hallway. Perfume, perfect hair, the kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged. "I need you to keep it simple at the wedding," she said. "Ryan Mitchell's family is very particular." Then she tilted her head, just slightly. "You're still alone, right?" I didn't answer. She smiled like she already had. Before I left, my mother handed me a garment bag. Inside was a pale beige dress, 2 sizes too big, shapeless. "This will be perfect for you," she said. "Perfect." I folded it back into the bag and carried it out to my car. I never planned to wear it. On the drive back to Richmond, something clicked. A name my father had mentioned. Whitaker. It stayed with me long enough that I looked it up the next morning at the office. Client database. Active projects. Whitaker Heritage Foundation. I stared at the screen for a long time, because I knew that name. Not from Millbrook. From work? I'd been leading a restoration project funded by that foundation for 6 months. Emails, video calls, design approvals. The chair, Catherine Whitaker, knew my work, trusted my judgment. She just didn't know my face. And now her son was marrying my sister. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle. I didn't smile. I didn't think about using it, but I filed it away. Because information isn't a weapon unless you choose to use it. That night, Daniel called me. "The reception venue," he said. "Millbrook Country Club. They've got a projector set up, slideshow, speeches, the usual." "Of course they do." "They're short-staffed," he added. "Looking for freelance AV help." I didn't say anything for a second. "You're thinking what I think you're thinking," he said. "I already applied," I told him. He exhaled a quiet laugh. "Of course you did." By midweek, Daniel was confirmed. Access to the projector. The inputs. The system that would carry whatever story they decided to tell about me across a 10-foot screen. Or whatever story I chose to tell. I didn't build something flashy. No dramatic music. No attacks. No insults. Just the truth. A photo of me at graduation. Alone. Smiling anyway. My architecture license. A job site. Hard hat. Steel 2 boots. The award I never told my family about. Slide by slide. Fact by fact. Clean, simple, undeniable. At the end, I added one line. The measure of a family is not how they celebrate their best, it's how they treat their most vulnerable. Daniel looked over it on my couch that Thursday night, scrolling slowly. "No insults," he said. "Just the record." "That's the point." He nodded. "What's the trigger?" I showed him my phone. One word. Already typed. "Begin." "When I send that," I said, "you switch it." He leaned back, thinking it through. "And if they don't do anything?" he asked. "If it's just a normal slideshow, if they keep it decent," I shrugged slightly. "Then nothing happens. We leave." He studied me for a moment. "You really think they'll keep it decent?" I met his eyes. "No, but I needed to give them the chance. Not for them, for me. Because once that line was crossed, once I pressed send, there was no going back to silence. And I needed to know without any doubt that I hadn't crossed it first. So everything was set. The dress, the hotel, the plan, the truth, sitting on a USB drive, waiting. All that was left was the moment, and whether they would choose to light the match. And it arrived exactly the way I knew it would. The wedding ceremony itself was quiet, predictable. A white chapel just outside Millbrook, sunlight cutting through stained glass, soft organ music filling the space. 200 people dressed like they were attending something important, not just a wedding, but a statement. I sat in the last pew, not by accident. That's where they expected me to be. From there, I had a clear view of everything. My father working the aisle like a campaign stop, shaking hands, leaning in close, smiling that practiced smile. My mother near the front, composed, elegant, the kind of presence that suggests control without ever saying a word. And my sister, radiant, confident, completely at ease in a world that had always been built for her. No one greeted me. No one asked me to move closer. I wasn't part of the picture. I was background. The ceremony ended with applause. Polite, measured, the kind people give when everything goes exactly as expected. But I knew better. The real event hadn't started yet. The reception was held at Millbrook Country Club. Crystal chandeliers, white linen tables, waitstaff moving in quiet, efficient patterns. The kind of place where everything looks effortless because someone else is working very hard to make it that way. Table 14. Back corner. Near the kitchen doors. Exactly where my father told me I'd be. Every time those doors swung open, the noise spilled out, dishes clattering, voices calling orders. The reality behind the presentation. I sat there with a plate of food I didn't touch and a glass of water I barely drank. A woman across from me asked what I did. "I'm an architect," I said. "That's nice," she replied, already turning away. "Of course." On stage, my sister took the microphone. Her voice carried easily, practiced, confident. She thanked everyone. Her parents, her friends, the Whitaker. Then her eyes found me. "And my sister Emily," she said, pausing just long enough to draw attention. "Who managed to show up today?" A few scattered laughs. Polite. Uncertain. I felt my phone in my hand under the table. The message was still there. Begin. Not yet. I wasn't here to interrupt a wedding. I was here to see what they would choose. My mother appeared beside me, her presence announced by the scent of her perfume before her voice. "Don't drink too much," she said quietly. "And don't talk about yourself." I nodded once. She leaned in just a little closer. And smile. Then she was gone, like she'd just adjusted something slightly out of place. The lights dimmed 20 minutes later. The room shifted. You can feel it when a crowd turns its attention in one direction. Conversations taper off. Chairs angle slightly. Glasses pause midair. "And now," the maid of honor said into the microphone, "a special presentation from the Carter family." The screen behind the head table flickered to life. Soft piano music filled the room. Baby pictures first. My sister as a child. Birthday candles. Ballet recitals. Family vacations. My father holding her hand by a lake. My mother smiling beside her on a beach somewhere bright and distant. Not a single photo of me. Of course. The room softened. Smiles. Quiet laughter. The safe kind. Then the music changed. Subtle, but noticeable. The tone shifted. The screen went black for half a second. Then, my face. High school. Old photo. Grainy. Unflattering. Across the bottom in bold white letters. High school dropout. A ripple of laughter. Small at first. Then growing. I felt it move through the room like something alive. I didn't move. Next slide. A cracked heart graphic. Divorced. Louder now. More confident. People leaning into it. Next. An animated empty wallet. Broke. Someone near the front actually laughed out loud. Next. A single chair at a table. Alone. The laughter was easy now. Comfortable. Then the last slide appeared. A cartoon baby. A red X across it. Infertile. The word stretched across a 10-foot screen. For a moment, the room hesitated. That line. Even they felt it. But then, a few laughs broke through. Awkward. Then more. Because once something is framed as a joke, people don't always know how to step away from it. My sister leaned into the microphone again. "Don't laugh too hard," she said lightly. "She might actually cry." My father smiled. "Just a joke, sweetheart." My mother lifted her glass, watching. And something in me went completely still. Not broken, not overwhelmed. Clear. I looked around the room. 200 people. Some laughing. Some looking down. Some pretending not to see. And at the front, Catherine Whitaker. Not laughing. Her glass paused midair. Her expression changed. I saw it. I felt it. That was the moment. Not when they started. Not when they crossed the line. But when I knew, someone else had seen it too. I looked down at my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. One word. Begin. I gave them one last second. One last chance to stop. To realize what they'd done. To choose differently. They didn't. So I pressed send. 3 seconds. That's all it took. The screen flickered. The music cut. A brief, confused murmur moved through the room. "Technical issue?" someone said. Behind the AV booth, Daniel moved exactly the way we planned. No hesitation, no panic, just a clean switch. The screen went black, then came back to life. White text. Simple. Centered. The real Emily Carter. The room went silent. Not polite silence. Not uncertain silence. Complete. My father stood up. "What is this? Turn it off." He looked toward the back. Daniel didn't move. There was no off switch anymore. The first slide appeared. Me, cap and gown, standing alone. No one came to my graduation. I went anyway. No music, no effects, Just truth. And for the first time that night, the room leaned in, not to laugh, but to listen. You can feel the difference in a room when that shift happens. It's subtle at first, like a current changing direction, but once it takes hold, everything moves with it. No one was looking at my sister anymore. No one was checking their phones. Every eye was on that screen. The next slide came up. My architecture license. Clean. Official. The seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia stamped across the top. Licensed architect. A murmur moved through the crowd. Not laughter this time. Recognition. The kind people don't mean to show, but can't quite hide. Another slide. Me on a job site. Hard hat. Steel-toe boots. Blueprints tucked under my arm. The skeleton of a courthouse rising behind me. Steel beams. Scaffolding. Something real taking shape. Senior architect. Mercer and Hollis. Chairs shifted. People actually turned to look at me now. Not the way they had before. Not with amusement. Not with curiosity. With recalculation. Because something didn't match. The story they'd just been shown, and the one unfolding in front of them. Another slide. A framed plaque. Virginia Emerging Architect of the Year. This time, the reaction was louder. A man near the front leaned toward his wife, whispering something I couldn't hear. A woman at table 5 put her hand to her chest like something had just landed there. At the head table, my sister wasn't smiling anymore. My mother's glass hovered in her hand, untouched. And my father, he was watching the room, not me. The room, because that's what mattered to him. Always had. The next slide came up. No image this time. Just text. White on black. Simple. Direct. You called me a dropout. I have a master's degree. You called me broke. I own my home. You called me a failure. I design buildings for a living. No music. No voiceover. Just the weight of it. I stood up from table 14. I didn't rush. I didn't walk to the stage. I just stood where I was near the kitchen doors, in the place they'd assigned me, and faced the front of the room. My father stepped away from the head table, his smile already reforming, already trying to reshape the narrative. "Folks," he said, raising his hand slightly, "I apologize for the interruption. My older daughter has always had a bit of a flair for drama." A few weak chuckles. They didn't hold. "This is clearly a misunderstanding," he continued, walking toward me. "We'll get things back on track." Stop. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The word landed anyway. He froze. Just for a second, long enough for people to notice. "I didn't drop out," I said. My voice sounded exactly the way it does in meetings. Steady, measured, unshaken. My father pulled my college tuition when I was 17 because I wouldn't sign over land my grandmother gave me. A ripple moved through the room. He opened his mouth. I kept going. I didn't choose to be alone. I was told to leave. I was 18. I had $43 and a duffel bag. Somewhere to my left, a chair scraped against the floor. I married someone I shouldn't have. I left when I understood what it was. That's not failure. That's survival. The room had gone completely still now. Not even the kitchen noise behind me was breaking through. And infertile. I paused. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I wanted them to sit with it. "That's a medical condition," I said finally, not a punchline. I looked directly at my sister. "You put that on a screen for 200 people. Her face had lost its color. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. I turned to my mother. "You helped create those slides." Her lips parted slightly. No words. Then my father. "You told me to sit in the back. Stay quiet. Not embarrass you." I let the silence stretch. Just long enough. The only embarrassment in this room, I didn't raise my voice, is what you just did to your own daughter. No one laughed. No one moved. And for the first time in my life, no one told me to sit down. The final slide appeared behind me. That line I added 5 days earlier. The measure of a family is not how they celebrate their best. It's how they treat their most vulnerable. I didn't turn to look at it. I didn't need to. I could feel it there, like something settled into place. My father took a step closer, his voice dropping low enough that only the nearby tables could hear. "Sit down," he said. "Right now, or you will never see your grandmother again." There it was, the last lever, the one he'd used my entire life. I met his eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel it. No fear, no hesitation. Just clarity. "You don't get to use her anymore," I said quietly. Something in his expression shifted. Not anger, Something smaller. Because the moment had passed. And he knew it. The room knew it too. Whatever story they thought they were watching at the beginning of the night wasn't the one they were seeing now, and there was no way to take it back. You could feel it in the room. The shift had already happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Like something invisible had tipped, and everyone knew which side they were standing on now. That's when I heard the chair move. Slow, deliberate, not rushed, not reactive. Intentional. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Catherine Whitaker. She stood from the head table with the kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention, it takes it. Conversations didn't stop because she demanded it. They stopped because people noticed. She walked toward me, her heels steady against the hardwood floor. Measured steps. No hesitation. No glance toward my father. No acknowledgement of my sister. Just me. She stopped about 3 feet away. Close enough that I could see the detail in her expression. Not shock. Not confusion. Recognition. Her eyes moved briefly to the screen behind me. My name, my work, my title still visible. Then back to my face. T. Mercer Linden, she said. Not a question. A confirmation. I nodded once. Yes, ma'am. A small pause. The kind that carries weight. You're the lead architect on the Millbrook Heritage Project. Yes. She turned then. Slowly. And when she faced my father, the entire room followed her line of sight, like it was instinct. Mr. 8. Carter, she said, her voice calm, precise. The woman you just humiliated in front of my family is the architect I hired to restore the most important building in this town. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. You could see it land. On him. On my mother. On my sister. On every single person who had laughed 5 minutes earlier. My father blinked once, like he needed time to process something that didn't fit into the version of reality he'd been working from. He started. I wasn't aware. No, Catherine said, cutting in gently but completely. You weren't. That was the difference. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You weren't aware, she continued, because you didn't bother to know your own daughter. A ripple moved through the room. Not laughter. Not whispers. Something heavier. Because people weren't just watching anymore. They were reassessing everything. My sister stepped forward quickly, her voice tight, trying to recover something that had already slipped. This is insane, she said. She's twisting everything. She's always been... Catherine didn't look at her. Not once. Instead, she kept her focus on my father. And just so we're clear, she said, the Millbrook Heritage Project is not a small undertaking. My foundation is funding the full restoration. Timeline, budget, oversight, it all runs through my office. My father straightened slightly, instinct kicking in. The same instinct that had carried him through decades of business deals and handshake agreements. Of course, he said quickly. And we value that partnership. Catherine raised her hand. Not high. Just enough. And he stopped. That alone told the room everything it needed to know. After what I've just witnessed, she said, there is no partnership. Silence. Real silence. The kind that settles into your chest. My mother's hand tightened around her glass. My sister looked from Catherine to Ryan Mitchell, her new husband, like she was searching for something to anchor herself to. Ryan Mitchell didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't defend her. He just stood there, watching, processing. My father tried again. This is a misunderstanding, he said, his tone shifting, softer now, controlled. Family situations can be complicated. Emotions. I understand complicated, Catherine said. What I don't understand is putting your daughter's medical history on a 10-foot screen and calling it entertainment. No one looked away from her. No one interrupted. Because there wasn't anything to interrupt. The truth has a way of doing that. It clears space. She turned slightly then, just enough to include the room without losing her focus. My family, she said, doesn't do business with people who treat their own like that. That was it. No speech. No escalation. Just a line. Drawn clean. And impossible to ignore. I watched my father in that moment. Really watched him. The way his posture shifted. The way his expression tightened not into anger, but into something more fragile. Because this wasn't about me anymore. Not to him. This was about loss. Control. Reputation. The thing he had spent his entire life building. And for the first time, he couldn't manage it. He couldn't smooth it over. He couldn't rewrite it. because the room had already seen what it needed to see. And someone who mattered had just said it out loud. And still, it wasn't over. Not yet. You could feel it the way people held their breath just a second longer, like something else was coming, like the story hadn't finished unfolding. Catherine had drawn the line, but there was one more truth left, and it had been sitting in my pocket the entire night. My father tried to recover. Of course he did. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his shoulders, reached for that same voice he used in meetings and negotiations, the one that smoothed things over, reshaped outcomes, kept everything under control. "Catherine," he said, quieter now, more careful. "This doesn't have to affect the Silver Creek Development Project. That's a separate matter." Silver Creek Development. The word landed differently now, not as leverage, as exposure. And something in me clicked, because for 16 years, that word had been tied to one moment, one decision, one line I refused to cross. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the folded paper, the photocopy my grandmother had pressed into my hand just days earlier, the one my father never thought I'd see. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "it's not separate." The room turned again, not sharply this time, slowly, deliberately, listening. I unfolded the paper, didn't rush it, didn't dramatize it, just let it exist. "The center parcel," I said, holding it where Catherine could see. "The 2 acres you've been planning to build on." I met my father's eyes. "Still belongs to me." For a second, nothing. No reaction. No sound. Just the kind of silence that happens when something doesn't fit into the version of reality people have been operating in. My father's face didn't change right away. That's the thing about men like him. They hold the expression as long as they can. Control first. Always. "She was supposed to sign it over years ago," he said, too quickly. "It's already accounted for." "I was 18, I said. "You tried to force me." The words didn't need emphasis. They carried their own weight. I said no. I folded the paper once, carefully, and you threw me out. That landed harder than anything else had. Because now, it wasn't just about a daughter. It was about a decision. A choice. One that had consequences he'd been avoiding for 16 years. Catherine didn't take the paper. She didn't need to. She looked at my father. Long enough. Steady enough. "You represented to my foundation," she said, "that all parcels tied to Silver Creek Development were fully secured." He didn't answer. Not right away. Because there wasn't a version of the truth he could reshape fast enough this time. "You were prepared to build," she continued, "on land you don't own. Without disclosure." That word disclosure hung in the air like a verdict. Not emotional. Not personal. Professional. Final. My father's mouth opened slightly. Closed again. No recovery. No pivot. Because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was accountability. And it had arrived in front of 200 witnesses. I slipped the paper back into my jacket. Not as a weapon. Not as a threat. Just as truth. Something that had always been mine. Even when everything else wasn't. For 16 years, he had built a story around that land. Told people it was his. Used it in deals. Wove it into his reputation. And all it took was one moment. One sentence. To unravel it, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step forward. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, he didn't have the final word. And everyone in that room knew it. You could feel the shift settle in, not loud, not chaotic, just irreversible. The kind of moment where nothing explodes, but everything changes. For a second, no one moved. Then a chair scraped. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't someone storming out. It was quieter than that. An older couple near the back stood up, gathered their things, and walked toward the exit without a word. No announcement. No confrontation. Just a decision. And that's when it started. Another table followed. Then another. A man loosened his tie as he stepped away. His wife already halfway to the door. A woman near the center of the room picked up her purse, gave a small shake of her head, and left without looking back. No one said, "We're leaving because of what you did." They didn't need to. The message was clearer this way. The room began to thin. Not quickly. Not all at once. But steadily. Like air leaving something that had been overinflated for far too long. At the head table, my sister was still standing. But she didn't look like a bride anymore. The confidence was gone. The practiced smile, gone. What was left looked unfamiliar on her face, something closer to confusion than anger. "Babe," she said, turning to Ryan Mitchell, reaching for him like she expected him to anchor her back into place. He didn't take her hand. He didn't step closer. He just looked at her. Really looked. "You told me she was unstable," he said, his voice low, controlled. "You said she had issues." "She does," my sister shot back too quickly. "She's always been... She's a licensed architect," he said. "With awards, with a career, and you put that on a screen at our wedding. That word that hung heavier than anything else, because it didn't need explanation. Everyone knew what it meant." My sister's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a version of the story that worked. My mother tried next. She stepped forward, her composure cracking in small, visible ways. "Not enough for a scene, but enough for anyone paying attention. This is a family matter," she said, her voice thinner than before. "It shouldn't be handled like this." Catherine didn't raise her voice. Didn't step "You handled it like this," she said, glancing briefly at the screen behind me. "When you made it public." There it was again. Not emotion. Not accusation. Just fact. And facts don't leave room for interpretation. My father hadn't moved. He stood in the center of the room like someone who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he believed. For years, he had controlled every narrative. In business, in the community, in his own family, he knew how to pivot, how to recover, how to reshape perception before it settled. But this wasn't something he could talk his way out of, because the damage wasn't just what had been said, it was who had seen it. The Whitaker. The people who mattered in rooms he needed access to. The people who decided which doors opened and which stayed closed. And now those doors were closing, right in front of him. "You're overreacting," he said finally. But even he could hear it. The weakness in it. The lack of weight. Catherine didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because by then, the room had already answered for her. More guests were leaving now. Quietly. Deliberately. No one stopping to say goodbye. No one pretending this was still a celebration. The music had stopped at some point. No one had turned it back on. The chandeliers still glowed overhead, but the warmth was gone. What was left felt exposed, like something that had been carefully staged, suddenly seen under the wrong light. My mother sat down slowly in the nearest chair. Her hand reached for her wine glass, but she didn't lift it. She just held it, staring at the tablecloth like it might offer some version of reality she could still control. My sister sank back into her seat at the head table. Her dress still perfect, her makeup still in place, but everything else, gone. Ryan Mitchell stepped back. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough to create space. And sometimes, that's all it takes. A few inches. A decision. My father looked at me then. Not like before. Not with authority. Not with expectation. With something else. Something smaller. But I didn't step forward. I didn't say anything else. Because there was nothing left to prove. The room had already done the work. 16 years of silence had ended in under 10 minutes. Not with shouting. Not with chaos. With clarity. And the thing about clarity is, once people see it, they can't unsee it. I stood there, in the same place they had assigned me at the beginning of the night. Table 14. Back corner, near the kitchen doors. And I realized something I hadn't understood before. It was never about where they put me. It was about whether I stayed there. And for the first time, I hadn't. I wasn't standing in the back of the room anymore. Not really. Something had shifted. And it wasn't just the way people saw me. It was the way I saw myself in that space. I looked around what was left of the reception. Half-empty tables, abandoned glasses, conversations that had died mid-sentence, and I realized something I should have understood years ago. I didn't come here to win. I didn't come here to tear them down. I came here because someone I loved asked me to show up. And I had. Everything else was a consequence. I took a step forward, not toward the stage, not toward my father. Just forward. Enough that I wasn't hidden anymore. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding," I said, my voice steady, carrying easily in a room that had gone quiet on its own. "I came because Grandma Margaret asked me to." No one interrupted. No one looked away. "I didn't come to fight," I continued, "and I'm not interested in going back and forth about what happened tonight." I let that settle, because I meant it. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. That part was already done. "I don't hate any of you," I said, looking at my sister first, then my mother, then finally my father. But I am done being your version of me. My sister's eyes dropped. My mother didn't move. My father held my gaze, but there was nothing behind it this time that I needed to respond to. If you want me in your life, I said, it starts with respect. No conditions. No negotiations. No performances. Just that. And if that's not something you can do? I paused, not for effect, just to make sure the words were exactly what I meant. Then this is where it ends. I didn't wait for a response, because I wasn't asking for one. That's the difference. I reached for my clutch, smoothed the front of my dress not to compose myself, but because it felt natural, like closing a chapter you've already finished reading. And then I turned. Not in anger, not in defeat, just done. For the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving because I had nowhere else to go. I was leaving because I finally knew I didn't need to stay. The night air outside the country club felt different, cooler, cleaner, like stepping out of a room that had been holding its breath for too long. The October air in Virginia has a way of doing that, sharp enough to wake you up, steady enough to ground you. I stood there for a moment beside my car, keys in my hand, just listening. No music, no laughter, no voices following me out. Just quiet. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. A soft knock on the passenger window broke the stillness. Daniel, still in his black polo, still calm, like none of this had surprised him. He held up 2 cups of gas station coffee. Figured you might need this, he said as I unlocked the door. I let out a small breath, something between a laugh and relief, and took the cup from him. I think I needed that about 10 minutes ago, I said. You handled it better than most people would have, he replied, settling into the passenger seat. I didn't handle it, I said quietly. I just stopped avoiding it. We sat there for a minute, watching people leave the building in small clusters. No one lingered. No one looked back. Consequences have a way of moving faster than explanations. My phone buzzed. A message from Ryan Mitchell. I'm sorry. I didn't know. We need to talk. I stared at it for a second, then locked my screen. Some conversations don't belong to that moment. Another message. From the nurse at Shenandoah Hills. Your grandmother watched everything. Someone streamed it. She's been laughing all night. She said, "That's my girl." That one stayed with me. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes just for a second, and let that settle in. Not the confrontation. Not the fallout. Her voice. Her approval. The one thing I had never needed to earn. I should go see her tomorrow, I said. Daniel nodded. Yeah, he said. You should. And I did. The next morning, I drove out to Shenandoah Hills without calling ahead. No permission. No conditions. Just showed up. The front desk didn't stop me this time. Didn't check a list. Didn't make a call. They just smiled and pointed me toward the sunroom. She was sitting by the window when I walked in. A blanket across her lap, sunlight catching the edges of her white hair. She looked smaller than I remembered. But her eyes, still sharp, still steady, still hers. There she is, she said, reaching for my hand before I even sat down. I didn't say anything right away. I just held her hand. Because for once, I didn't have to explain anything. I saw it, she said, squeezing my fingers. Every bit of it. I smiled slightly. I figured you might. She leaned back in her chair, studying me the way she always had, like she wasn't looking for what was wrong, but what was true. You stood up, she said. You taught me how, I replied. She laughed softly. About time you used it. We sat there for hours, talking, not about the wedding, not about my parents, about my work, my projects, the buildings I was helping bring back to life, the things I had built quietly, without an audience. She asked questions. Real ones. The kind no one else had ever bothered to ask. And I answered, all of it. Not because I needed her approval, but because she cared enough to listen. When I left that afternoon, nothing dramatic had changed. My family hadn't apologized. The past hadn't rewritten itself. But something else had. The way I carried it. The following weeks were quieter. The noise from Millbrook faded into distant second-hand updates, things Daniel mentioned in passing, conversations I chose not to step back into. My father called once. I didn't answer. My mother sent a message. I'm sorry. 2 words. No context. No ownership. I read it. Then I set my phone down. Some things don't need a response. Not right away. maybe not ever. My sister called a few weeks later. Her voice didn't sound the same. Less certain. Less rehearsed. "I started seeing someone," she said. "A therapist." I didn't say anything for a second. Then, "Good," I replied. We didn't fix everything in that call. We didn't even try. But for the first time, it felt like we were standing on something real. Not perfect, not complete, but possible. Life didn't reset after that night. It moved forward, the way it always does. I went back to work, back to my projects, back to early mornings and long days, and the quiet satisfaction of building something that lasts. The Millbrook Heritage Project moved ahead. I stood in front of that same town weeks later, presenting plans, answering questions, walking them through what that building could become. No one laughed. No one questioned why I was there. They listened, because now, they knew. Not the version of me they'd been told. The one that stood in front of them. And for the first time, that was enough. And for the first time, that was enough. Not because they finally understood me. Not because everything was repaired or forgiven, but because I stopped needing it. There's a difference between wanting to be seen and waiting your whole life for permission to exist. I spent years thinking those two things were the same. They're not. What I learned standing in that room, walking out of it, and building everything that came after is this. You don't earn your worth by surviving someone else's version of you. You don't prove your value by staying where you're disrespected. And you don't need a room full of people to change their minds, for your life to finally make sense. Respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you require. And if it's not there, you leave. Not in anger, not to punish anyone, but because staying costs you more than walking away ever will. They called me things that night. Some of them were true, some of them weren't, but none of them defined me. Because at some point, you realize something simple. Your life doesn't get better when people finally see you. It gets better when you stop asking them to. Real strength isn't proving people wrong, it's no longer needing their approval. Over time, you learn that some relationships are built on control, not care, and no amount of explaining will change that. What you can control is what you accept. Set boundaries. Build a life that stands on its own, quietly and steadily. Let your actions speak where words fail. And when respect isn't offered, don't argue for it, walk away with clarity. Because peace doesn't come from being understood by everyone, it comes from finally understanding your own worth.